welcome to Pursue the Pull, the podcast that is geared towards helping people who are looking for a career change and for those who want to pursue their dreams and maybe start their own business. Now, how do we differ from all of the other inspirational podcasts out there? Well, what we do is we interview people from a range of industries. So if you want to start up your own marketing agency or floristry or restaurant, whatever it might be, we have someone specific from that industry to tell you exactly how to start, the highs and the lows, and most importantly, the truth. Now, we are one group, one community, and we have all of the answers. Now, I am your host, Stacey Bevan, and today I have an amazing guest. I am so excited for this interview. I am with Laurence Conisbee, who is the founder of Distillery, which specialises in the production of high-quality spirits and liqueurs, from brandy and apple brandy to whiskey, malt spirit, gin, and more. So first of all, thank you for joining us, Laurence. We really appreciate the insight that you're going to give us today.
Yeah, no, pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to meet you too. Okay, so before we actually go into the questions that have been devised by our audience, I just want to give a bit of background into you and your company and what it is that you actually do. So, in 2001, you learned the craft of traditional cider making, and by 2009, you had invested in state-of-the-art equipment, and your garage had become home to almost 1,000 litres of apple juice in various stages of fermentation. Once the 2009 vintage was ready, you started to sell the cider to pubs and festivals under the name of Virtual Orchard. By 2011, sales were steady, and then a couple of things happened. Firstly, a chance meeting with a fledgling distiller from near Cambridge, which led to the development of an apple brandy made from your own cider. And secondly, your cider was crowned Camera Gold Medal Champion Cider of Britain, which is an amazing achievement. And then in 2012, Virtual Orchard became incorporated and operations shifted a few hundred yards to an old timber yard alongside the Grand Union Canal. A larger press was purchased, and by the end of that autumn, production had increased to 18,000 litres, and you had 8 variants of cider at this stage. And then by the end of 2014, you received news that you had been granted your licenses to compound, rectify, and distill. And this meant that you could now be in complete control of the full peak to seed process, as well as opening up opportunities for further new product development. So then in 2015, and there's a whole story behind this, which we're going to go into in a lot of detail, but this is when you actually deviated slightly from the apple path, and Virtual Orchard became England's smallest whisky distillery. So then in 2007, we saw the conception of Distillery and the transformation of your business from cidery to distillery. Although cider was and still is a minor offering, but handcrafted spirits and liqueurs was your new future. So then going forward to 2019, you became the 8th English distillery to produce whiskey since 1903. And as well as the whiskey and apple brandy, you also focus on dark spirits and had rum ready for release in 2020. And this is the last bit, I promise we're going to go more in from you. But at this point, we should also mention that gin came onto the agenda. And you do a craft number of Northamptonshire gins, of which you are very proud. I'm very proud that you do that also. Another side to Wolf Distillery is contract distilling, initiating from requests from brewers and other cider makers to distill small batches of their cider. And you now offer bespoke distilling across a variety of spirits and specialise in helping new brands and bring an idea to actuality in a slow risk and cost-effective way. So this is amazing, and I'm so excited to just go into all of this and know how you got started and everything. So if it's okay with you, shall we start with the questions that have been created by the audience?
Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so what I think everyone else is really eager to know is, how did you get into this? You know, where did this all come from? What is the background? What's the story? And, you know, were you employed before you went into this? And was there a transition? How did you make that transition? So how did you do all of this? Was there a plan? Please talk us through.
So, well, I think the first thing to say that there wasn't really a plan to start with. Our first dalliance with making alcohol was actually way back in 1995. So, but before that, leaving school and college, I'd always wanted to be a cartographer, so a map maker, and you see the map behind me, kind of I still carried that through to our branding today. So, I'd actually worked for the military making maps for a number of years. And then eventually decided I needed to expand my experience and knowledge. Went off travelling for a bit, came back, found myself in back at agricultural college in Essex, near Clacton-on-Sea, and the grant didn't really pay for more than a couple of pints of beer a week, but I had access to some apples and an apple press, so started making cider. And started selling that to the student union bar and to local pubs. And that lasted about 3 years, had a little brand called Hogshead Cider. But then finished my course and got a job back in the real world, as it was. And then for the next 25 years, I found myself in IT. So initially making maps digitally and then moving more into generic IT and IT service management. And worked for a number of big national, international companies like Symantec and the Sun and Oracle and Reuters. And then eventually I found myself in Milton Keynes, which is where I was living when I started Virtual Orchard, with 2 big apple trees in the garden. And I had a hammock strung between the 2 trees. And because I'd had experience of making cider in a former life, as it were, I used to lie in the hammock thinking, at some point I need to do something with those apples because they're just going to waste. And after a couple of years of talking about it, it was actually my ex-mother-in-law who said to me, look, how much is it going to cost to get the kit to start making cider? And so she actually gave me a blank check. But I'm very conservative though, so I literally just bought a small press. So for an initial investment of about £800, bought a small press and some containers to ferment the cider and started making it in the garage. That was in 2009. What we'd learned from making cider in the past is that you leave it a year before you start drinking it. So you drink when you're making cider this year, you're drinking last year's cider. That's the general rule. So after a year, I now had 1,000 litres of cider in the garage, and I needed to start selling it because there's way more than I could actually drink. And because people had heard that I'd got an apple press, they started bringing our apples to me to make cider. So we did give some away, but we created Virtual Orchard, virtual because the apples were coming from probably 40, 50 different locations across Milton Keynes and South Northamptonshire. And virtual kind of played into my IT background. So Virtual Orchard seemed to work quite well. And that ticked along quite nicely for a few years. As you mentioned, we won the gold medal Champion Cider of Britain, which didn't change things overnight. We were the smallest ever producer to get that award. But it did start making me thinking that there was perhaps an opportunity to scale up production. Because based in Milton Keynes, we weren't in a very well-known cider making area. In fact, we were the only commercial cider maker outside of really the West Country or East Anglia, which are the big areas for cider making. Yeah. So the break really came in 2012 when I was working for an IT company in Milton Keynes and Hatfield, and there'd been a change of management, and let's just say an opportunity came to leave with a small amount of money. And I've had redundancy kind of on 2 previous occasions in my career. And I guess I've always taken those as opportunities to take a step back. The temptation is always to dive straight in and get another job doing a similar kind of thing. Yeah. But I always like to take a step back and go, okay, well, what do I enjoy doing? Is this the right path? Should I look to do something different? And so the cider was really just a hobby. But when I left the company, the IT company, I kind of thought, well, could it be more than that? And I'm always, I guess I'm always prepared to take a certain amount of risk. I wouldn't say I'm risk adverse, but I did have 2 young children at this time and a mortgage to pay. But I just felt strongly that kind of if I didn't do it now, then someone else would.
Yeah.
and it
Wow.
didn't require a huge amount of investment to really step up production. And I'd worked out how much I needed to make and sell in order to cover the bills. And
Wow.
I would actually break it down and look to see how much you really need to spend to survive. It's
Yeah.
not as much as a lot of people think, although obviously in the current climate, you know, there's lots of challenges around cost of living, but
Yeah.
it's surprising how much you can, how much little you actually do need. So I had this figure in mind of how much cider I needed to make to pay the bills. To enable that to happen, I moved out of the garage, because the garage is now full of cider. I moved down to a small unit on the Grand Union Canal on a place called Galleon Wharf.
Was you on your own at this point, or did you have any help at this point, or does that come in later on, or was you just doing this on your own?
No, this is just me. This is me, just a one-man, the
Wow.
classic one-man band.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing with cider making is a lot of activity in a short space of time. So, you know, the apples are ripe kind of around August time, and then we'll be pressing apples through till about October. So you've got a period of frenetic activity, and then the rest of the time it's just sitting there fermenting away. So that gives you the chance then to go out and start selling your cider and working on the branding and other aspects. So it's quite a neat little business in that respect, in that you do have time to do it as a one person affair. So and as you mentioned, we kind of, you know, along the way we did meet a few other people. We met a distiller and decided we'd have a go at distilling some of the apple juice or cider into brandy, and that seemed to be quite popular, you know. And but by this time, by 2012, we had the apple juice, we had cider, we had apple brandy, we'd done a little bit of mead, and we'd created a little shop on the wharf selling other local spirits and liqueurs and other products. And of course, lots of passing trade on the canal, so people would like moor up and pop in and see us. And we'd always had we'd always had this ethos of kind of being completely transparent and open and welcoming people in to see what we did and how we did it. And I think that was quite key for the nature of the business we had, was being kind of just welcoming of people to see what's going on. Because particularly in an area where no one else is making cider, people are a little bit curious as to well, you know, how do you do that? Where do you get your apples from? Because you go around Milton Keynes, you know, it's famous for its roundabouts and everything else. People say, well, where are all the apple trees? But there's actually over 300 sites of fruit trees in Milton Keynes that you can get fruit from, accessible to the public. So, and then so that was, the transition was actually quite easy in that respect then. So I'd kind of, I've been in IT, I guess. I wouldn't say I was tired of IT. I really enjoyed what I was doing while I was doing it. But at the back of my head, I'd always, right from probably working in Reuters in the early 2000s, knew that at some point I would be working for myself. I would have my own business. It was always there at the back of my mind that I wanted to have my own business, but I didn't know what it was. So it was quite nice when the cider just kind of almost just crept up along the side. And then the timing was just right, and it just felt right to do it. And for me, although I do like cider, but I was more passionate about the process of making cider. So that's kind of what drove me to do it, is I just really enjoyed the process of taking an apple off a tree, pressing fresh juice, letting nature naturally ferment that juice into cider, and then packaging it and selling it. So I was probably more driven by the process and satisfaction from people actually trying it and actually enjoying what we're, you know, the genuine fruits of my labours.
Yes. So you more kind of went into this from a passionate point of view and what you enjoyed doing, rather than thinking I'm going to set up my own business and run my own business. Would you say that's a correct view on that, or would you say that you always had this idea I need to work for myself, I need to set up a business? What was the thought process there?
No, it was. I just always knew that at some point I would have my own business, but I didn't really know what it was. And I think one of the things which kind of describes my career is that if you look at where I've gone and where I've worked, there's not necessarily logic of how I got from A to B to C to D.
Yeah.
And I think it was more a question of seeing an opportunity and seeing something that looked interesting. So I generally was kind of lured by something that just sounded like an interesting thing to work with, and then that led me on to working for various different companies. But at the back of my mind, it was always a question of at some point I would work for myself.
Did you have to like take any training or, anything to, enable you to grow the company and in terms of creating these different drinks and going into the spirit? Like, was there any training that you had to take, or was it just a case of learning as you were going?
Yeah, it was pretty much learning as I went along. But I guess in my career, I'd worked quite a lot in the sales environment, not as a salesperson, but as like a sales support kind of person. So I'd picked things up kind of in the 25 years previous, and as you can probably guess, I do like to talk. So, but I also like to listen, and I've been lucky enough to meet lots of interesting people, and also put myself in a position to meet interesting people, and just ask curious questions about how things were done. So, for example, when we talked to the distiller about distilling some cider into brandy, I actually went down to the distillery and was watching and observing and asking lots of questions to understand the process. And then over the course of 2 years, obviously picked up a lot of information, which stood me in good stead when we actually got our own license to distill.
That's great. And so this kind of ties into the second question. Like, how do you seek inspiration? Is there anyone in particular that you follow, or any company that you follow, or any books that you read, or do you have a business mentor? Where does it all come from, that self-motivation, that inspiration?
To be honest, I don't really know exactly where it's come from.
Okay.
I think it's just that when I find something I really enjoy, I really do get into it 100%. But like I say, but I also put myself in an environment with similar people in similar situations. So in Milton Keynes, when we started in 1998, I think, sorry, 2009, there weren't many small, if you like, artisanal food and drink businesses. So we generally knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody. So we'd quite often meet up for coffee, and so the local microbrewer would come down and we'd have coffee in the morning. And for example, our idea about producing whiskey really came about when the local brewer came to the distillery on the wharf. We'd just got our licenses and we were making apple brandy. And then we just joked about kind of, well, why don't we make some whiskey? Because I'm a brewer. The first stage of making whiskey is the same as the first stage of making beer. So he could do that part of it, and then I could distill it, lay it down into a cask and wait 3 years, and then we got some whiskey. And initially that was just a joke from a random coffee conversation. But then actually I went away and thought, well, actually kind of why don't we do this? There's actually nothing stopping us doing this. So again, it's just like, lots of talking to similar people in similar situations. And from that, ideas spawned in terms of maybe what direction to go in, what products to make. We're fortunate to know lots and lots of other local brewers and cider makers and vineyard owners. So I guess we were just put ourselves in a situation where we had lots of people with similar interests who were looking to get products into similar markets and could just share ideas and brainstorm kind of where we should go.
Yeah, amazing. And how did you actually get your first client, I would say, that helped you go to that next step, if you like? How did you get that first?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, because initially it was through just people we knew directly. But then when we I think two things. One is when we were doing just the cider, I mentioned we were the only cider maker for 40 miles in 2009. By 2017, there were now 15 cider makers within 20 miles. So now what we couldn't do was stop them deciding they wanted to make cider in our area. So that, I guess, what led us to say, well, okay, well, if we can't stop them, perhaps what we can do is actually buy a bigger press and offer to press their apples, because we knew that the investment in equipment is quite expensive. So to buy a big kit pays a lot of money, because we were a few years ahead of the game.
Yeah.
We thought, well, if we buy a bigger press, which is we can easily do all our capacity, then we can basically just sell out the spare capacity. So by the end of 2016, we were doing 200 tons of fruit a year, but only about 80 tons of that was for us. The rest of it was for other cider makers. So when we decided to focus purely on distilling, we'd already got this mindset of using spare capacity to do stuff for other people. But the real clincher came when I decided to actually kind of build a proper website. And this was quite significant. In 2017, we were politely asked to move off of our out of the Grand Union Canal to make room for housing development. And actually, on the face of it, we thought, oh, this is not great. We've been established here now for kind of 7 years. That how are we going to find a similar size unit in a good location? But actually, again, from all these events that happen that seem quite negative, there's always an opportunity to say, oh, okay, well, maybe there's a different way of doing things. So we actually found ourselves moving across the border out of Milton Keynes into Northamptonshire, and on a smaller site. And the site made us realise that we didn't have room for the stills and for the apple presses. Our research told us that there was now a lot more local cider makers than there were when we started, and that's an important point. Is always keep an eye on your competition. We did get a bit complacent. We did get a bit complacent in 2015. I think it did come as a bit of a shock to us when we didn't have like sole ownership of the territory. And there was lots of other people vying for the business. And so by 2017, we realized there were so many, but there was no one else doing distilling. So again, it presented an opportunity, and literally it was almost like a light bulb moment. It's like, well, we could compete with 15 other people, or we can compete with no one. So literally overnight, we put all our cider making equipment on the market. We ordered another still from Spain, from Portugal. And we rebranded to Wharf Distillery. So ironically, having left the Wharf, we now decided to call ourselves Wharf Distillery. And between Christmas and New Year in 2016-17, it's always a bit of a flat spot for most people. What do I do? So I built a website for Wharf Distillery. And on that website, I created a specific landing page for contract distilling. And at that time, there were very, very few people offering contract distilling at a very small scale. And equally, because it's a flat time of year, people generally start looking about rethinking their life and like, what am I going to do differently in the new year? And in January 2017, we just became inundated with requests for contract distilling. That's amazing. And what set our offering apart from the other people offering the same thing was that we were offering very small volumes where you didn't need to mortgage the house to actually get up and running.
That's incredible, the way that you took those challenges and you were able to overcome those challenges and see them as an opportunity. But I do want to ask, is there any other challenges or any other fears or anything that really happened that was kind of a moment where, oh gosh, how do we continue, or can we continue? Was there any kind of really hard challenge throughout this process that you thought, okay, I don't know whether I'll continue to do this, and what was that, and how eventually did you overcome such a challenge?
Yeah, I think that there's a constant challenge, because obviously, especially when you've got 2 young children as well, keeping the money coming in is always at the back of your mind. But I guess I almost kind of felt I was committed to what I wanted to do, and I really felt that there was still a huge opportunity to really just develop being the first person on the market in the area, and really get our products and get a name for what we do. So I guess I was driven by just the belief in what the end product was going to look like, and what that would be able to achieve. There were certainly times when it was tough, and the money sometimes coming in. I did eat into whatever little savings I had. Were absorbed during that process, but also I got lots of encouragement. Again, another key thing was keeping in touch with the local community of people doing similar kind of things. You know, there's so we I mean, as if I didn't have enough to do at the time, a fellow kind of food producer in Milton Keynes, we got to a point in around 2015 where we were thinking like there's now lots more small local producers, but not enough people know about us. And the irony is that in an age of technology and social media where it's so easy now to present your business as if it were a multinational company, you can produce a look and feel that makes you look as big as BP or Shell or whatever. But because it's so easy, there's a lot more noise out there. So it's still really difficult to kind of to shine through. So what we did is we decided to put on a food festival just purely for local people. So, and that kind of did two things. One, it kind of raised awareness to our locality about local producers, but also it meant that we then got to meet lots more local producers. Actually, we discovered in 2015 that there was now over 100 local producers, either street food or making cakes or honey or whatever. And so it was quite nice because we made lots more connections. And then we started looking at collaborations as well. So either, for example, a local chutney maker, we used to have some cider would go off, so we'd make it into our cider vinegar. So they need vinegar to make chutney. So we'd say, well, if we give you some cider vinegar, then maybe you just put on your label cider vinegar from Wharf Distillery. And so lots of little collaborations like that help because obviously then they're telling everybody about, we make fantastic chutney with cider vinegar from Wharf Distillery. So you've suddenly almost like doubled or massively increased the size of your audience and your reach. So little things like that, really helped.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's incredible. And that I was going to ask you about how you grew your business, but it's pretty evident, like from what you've just been saying, how you did grow your business. But I've got a question that's more of a two-part question. So obviously there's people out there, first of all, that want to start their own company. And there's also people out there who want to start their own company in the industry that you're in. So first part to that question is, what advice would you give to people who are thinking about starting their own business and going it alone? And, you had, like I had, with two children, it's really scary, but there's other people out there that are in either similar positions or have something going on, in their life, and they've got that fear as well. So, from the first part, what advice would you give for people that actually want to start their own business?
I think one of the key things, and because we have lots of contract customers, so 95% of our business is making product for other people, although we do have our own brands as well. And one of the key things I always say to them is really understand what your product offering is and why it's different to anyone else. What's going to make someone go to your product over anyone else's? And because if you don't understand who your audience is, and therefore what the product is that you're offering, then it's very difficult to really know where to start and where to go with it, because you end up trying to appease everybody and end up satisfying nobody. So that would be the first thing, is just have a really clear vision of what that end product offering is. Once you've done that, then and again, this is an analogy we use for our customers, is then how you get there. Don't be tunnel visioned about how to get there. There's often quite a few different paths to achieving an end result. So the key thing is to go out and do lots and lots of research, and then find out which method, which path is going to work best for you. Because quite often you'll find the path you take will have implications on cost, time to market, and other things. So striking that balance, is quite important. Another is don't spend too much on merchandise. So we've seen a lot of customers who, not just in our business, but in other business, they'll decide on a brand and a product, and then one of their first priorities seems to be the hat and the scarf and the jacket and the t-shirt, and they spend thousands on merchandise. And it's like, well, you haven't even got an audience yet for your product. You want to be selling your core product. The other stuff can follow later on. Like things like that can come later
Yeah, it's true, definitely. And just last question, what advice would you give to people that want to go in to do exactly what it is that you're doing? What advice would you give them to, get started?
Yeah, so again, come down to the product again, be very clear about what your product is. I would say consider, if you don't have a huge amount of money to invest, you've got a few options for funding. To set up a distillery is going to cost you, tens of thousands of pounds, even on a small scale. Yeah. So a good thing sometimes is to use a contract distiller, not necessarily us, there are others out there. Yeah. But they generally do provide a relatively low risk way of putting your toe in the water. So if you always fancy to have your own brand of gin or rum, again, first of all, what's going to make it different? Talk to various contract distillers, because that will enable you to get a product, get it to market, focus initially on sales and marketing, get the brand awareness, build the brand, and then if you want to then make it yourself, you can then make a transition to doing it yourself as well. So I would say don't, and it's a very competitive market, the spirits world. And I'd say that, if you're going to invest 30,000-40,000 pounds, that's a kind of could be considered a bit of a risky amount of investment for an unknown product or in a very competitive market. So definitely look to but find a contract distiller that you feel comfortable with. Always make sure you own the IP for the recipe as well, because if you leave that person and decide to go it alone, if you don't have the IP for the recipe, then especially if you want to then go on to get further funding, one of the first questions your investors are going to ask you is like, well, who owns the IP on the recipe for your product? If you want to go to a supermarket, they're going to want to know who owns the IP. And if you don't own that, you don't have a product.
That is incredible advice. No, seriously, I feel like doing it myself. Seriously, it sounds amazing. Look, thank you so much. You have been so vulnerable. You've given really amazing advice, and I know our audience are going to be really happy with this podcast. So from Pursue the Pool, we are so grateful that you decided to do this, and thank you so much for your time. It was a great interview, great insight. So thank you.
That's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.